All right, hi everyone. So what I forgot to teach you last time in like the masking stuff was a specific kind of masking. So I'm just going to do that first, and then we're going to move on to like a whole lot of other stuff. So today's going to be quite jam-packed. So let me start showing you. Okay, so what I didn't show you last time was basically the equivalent of Photoshop sort of clipping masks and stuff. So let's say you have a layer that you want to mask using another layer. So like we've got this blue solid over here. So, oops. So let me just delete this. Okay, so we've got this blue solid. It's just ordinary solid layer, but we want to mask it using another one of these layers. So I'm just going to use these two images that I had from last couple of ones. And if you remember, we've got this toggle switches modes button at the bottom over here. And that gives you this thing that we've ignored before where it says track matte. Basically, what that allows you to do is use any layer that is directly above another layer as a mask for that layer. So it can be a video, it can be an image, or anything. You can use that as a mask. So if I, on the blue solid over here, where it says track matte and none, I click on that, it'll give me a bunch of different options. So I can say alpha matte. Let me actually just swap these two layers quickly. So if I say alpha matte leaf, you see it's selecting only the layer that's directly above it. And I say alpha matte leaf, it will use the alpha channel, so the transparency channel on that layer above it as a mask on this layer. So if I move the leaf around, it'll mask off different areas of that. So that actually might be a bit easier to show you. I'm just turning that to none, and I'm putting the leaf above the dog. And if I turn alpha matte leaf on the dog layer, if I move the leaf around, you can see that it's masking and unmasking in the area of that leaf. So the other option is alpha inverted, which is just exactly the opposite. So anywhere that there is no alpha channel will be showing. So this way you can do cool stuff. You can use like text layers and stuff to be a mask. You can use video and other stuff, so you can create some cool effects. And then the other options we saw, alpha is Luma. So Luma is brightness. So if I use Luma of the leaf, that's using the brightness of the image. So if I just turn that off, you'll see that this layer is now invisible because it automatically gets turned visibility off, because there's no point masking an area that you can, you're going to be seeing. So, you know what I mean? It just turns off. So anyway, that's bright on this image will then be used as a mask for the one below it. So if I turn that on again, so the bright areas of the image will be used as a mask. And then the other thing is the opposite, so Luma inverted. So the dark, or in this case, there's no alpha channel. So, I mean, it's an alpha channel, so you can't see it. So everything else sort of shows up. So if I turn that on the blue one with the dog, with Luma, you can sort of see that a little bit better. The bright areas show up, or if you flip it, the dark areas or the alpha areas show up. So you can combine that and create some pretty cool effects. Okay, so today, the main thing that I'm going to be showing you is text. So how to animate text and different things like that. So let me just let me just start by showing you. So you can, just by using built-in things in After Effects, create powerful combinations of animated effects. So you can animate basically any property of text that you could think of, and then combine them together to get like interesting effects. And I just did a very quick example with this, but this is, we're animating position, the tracking, so the spacing between letters, and then some opacity and blur on all the individual letters. Okay, but before we do that, let's just create a new composition, and I'll show you just the default text creating stuff. So there's the text tool, and there's actually two different types. So if I click and hold, you've got horizontal and vertical type tool. Honestly, I don't know when you're going to use vertical type, but if I just click and type, you can see that you get text that goes vertically downwards. I've never had to use it, but if you need that, that's how you create it. But normally your ordinary text, so you can either just click and type, or you can click and drag, and then you'll create a text box, so then the text won't go outside the boundaries. So you see how it sort of just fits in there. I think that would make sense based on all the Illustrator and Photoshop stuff. So all that makes sense, and you'll see that you get the little character tool panel at the right. So that's where you change your font, and you have a paragraph tool where you get your justification and alignment and stuff like that. So all that should be very similar to what you would have in Photoshop or Illustrator. So you can adjust your size, line spacing. So let me just you got your line spacing, your tracking, and all that sort of stuff. So all that sits over there. If you don't see those windows, you can always add them by going into the window and finding your character and paragraph tool panels over here. So if they are missing. So I'm not going to go into the detail of all of that because you should know all that, I think. Fairly self-explanatory. So the text layer, you'll see that it gets named by what text you have in there. You can, of course, rename all your layers if you want, but it's handy to have them named what they actually are, in this case, the text. And you'll see that when I open up the drop-down, we get the same stuff. We've got the transform with all the ordinary things that we used to, anchor point, position, opacity, scale, and all that. And you can animate that. Normally, you can move your text around using that. But all the fun stuff sits under the text properties over here. So if I open that drop down, we've got a thing saying source text. So this is actually where you can contain the text that's in here. So you can actually animate what text is being displayed. And you can also, do interesting stuff that I'll show you later on in complicated stuff using programming and stuff to get text from other things. There's a thing for path options. We'll get into that later. And then the more options over here is just basically how, when you animated these, the individual letters and things will be grouped together. You don't usually have to adjust these, but if you want to get a specific effect, you might have to tweak things like, you see anchor point grouping here is set by character. You can do things by word or line, so you can get groups of things moving in different ways. The interesting stuff comes with a little thing that you might not have noticed, but there's a little thing saying animate over here. So this is where you're going to do most of the animating of the text. So if you click on the little arrow next to the animate over here, you'll see you get a whole lot of different properties. So this is selecting what you want to animate. And in this case, let's just start off with something simple like position. So we're going to animate the position. And you'll see what we get then is a thing called an animator getting added here. So animator 1, and it's got range selected 1 and position. So the position is the actual change that we're going to make. So if I just change this, you'll see that at the moment it's just moving the entire block of text wherever I change this to. So if I just, I don't know, move it up like that, that's controlling a position of everything at the moment. But that gets changed by this thing over here, the range selector. So if I click on that and open the details, you see you get a start and an end. So this is saying the range of the letters that will be affected by these values over here. So it's going from start 0% to end 100%. So that's basically saying everything from 0 to 100 will be affected. So if I change the 0, click and drag that, it's changing. So it's now going, if we go from 50 over here, it's half the letters are now being moved and half are not. And you'll see that as I move this, they sort of shift into position. So this is basically how you would animate this changing thing. So if I turn the stopwatch on start, move a couple seconds in and go to 100%, we get this animation of the text moving letter by letter into the original position. And I know this can be a little bit tricky the first time you do it, so I'm just going to repeat all that again. So I'm just going to create a new layer. So under text, I'm going to add an animator. I'm going to do position. And the position over here is the values that will be changing. So if I move them all to the left and all downwards, that's the change from the original position to where they will animate to. So if I go to the range selector and change the start and the end, so it's going all the letters at the moment. So I'm going to add a stopwatch on the start and the end this time, just to show you a little bit of difference. And then I move to 100. So this is exactly what I had before. But you can also do the opposite. So you can move backwards. So you can get different combinations of orderings and things as you wish if you want to go for specific directions backwards or forwards of your text. So the next thing I want to explain is the offset. So I'm just going to just remove all these keyframes over here, and I'm just going to do start and end. So start at 0 and end at 10%. So that's 10% of this text group over here is being affected at the moment from the start to 10% in. So that's the first sort of 3 letters over here. But the offset over here is basically a way of moving this across the text. So I can move the offset, and you'll see now we get just a small section of this being moved across and then moving back, because it's only those letters that are affected by this animator. So I think you can see, like, when you combine these different things, you can get a really interesting assortment of effects. And this is just one effect at the moment, the position. Okay, so let me just move to a little section over here and I can sort of show you some other settings. So as it is, we've got these 3 letters that are being moved down over here. But you can refine the settings of this range selector a little bit more. So like how some of these letters move sort of halfway over here. So there's that little, there's a little bit of motion in these ones and it sort of sits into place as it goes along. That is controlled by the advanced settings over here. So that comes from the shape over here. So you see where it says shape square? That is just like, it's kind of hard to explain, but like the shape of the change in the graph of this motion over here. So if I just change square to ramp up, you'll see that you get a different effect of these motions over here. So you can mess around with these and find a different effect that suits what you want to get. So over here with smooth, we basically just get one letter that sits in space and then all the other ones sort of smoothly move into place. Around is similar, but it's sort of just a more, will be at the bottom. The square, which we had at the beginning, was, so it's more of a square drop off. So 2 letters at the moment are sitting at the bottom and then they quickly fall into space. And then the ramp up, you'll see that it's all the things before. So ramp up, so up to the point that you animate is being affected. Ramp down is all the things before. So don't really worry about too much exactly what those things mean, but you can just sort of mess around and find an effect that you want with these different things. Triangle is just a sharper group of these things. So if I just go to the default, you'll see that also you get different change in the settings that appear at the bottom over here. So ease high, ease low, different things appear depending on the different settings that you have over here. So that's controlling the sort of easing of the keyframes that you're getting here. So you see ease is something that's said quite often. That's just the smoothing of these effects into place. So really it's just a thing that I want you to like just experiment with these. And then you can sort of change these just to get different effects of the motion. So these other settings that are over here under advanced is the units and the based on. So those are things that you will adjust quite often. So especially based on characters is what's selected at the moment. So you'll see each individual letter or character, so like punctuation or whatever, is being selected at the moment. But you can say characters excluding spaces, words, or lines. So if I turn on to words, what we'll get is this animation being just on individual words instead of individual letters. And then you can also have that based on lines. So individual lines of text animating. And then the other thing here, percentage, is what's currently selected. So that's basically saying 0 is the start of the text and 100 is the end of the text. But the other setting here is index, which is basically 0 is the beginning of the text and then the number is the number of characters. So if you want to animate a specific letter, so let's say you want to animate the 5th to the 10th character in this, you can say start and end at index 5 to 10, and that will be character 5 to 10 that get affected. So in this case, that's animate over here. So if you really want to fine tune and have specific things, so say you want to animate the A in animation, so you can go 5 to 6. So that's just selecting one character over here, because that is now what's selected. So you can combine these and you can do very specific things if you want, or you can animate whole lines of text and all that sort of stuff. And the last little thing that I want to show you in the advanced settings over here is something that can be fun to use, is randomize order. So you can say, turn that on, and then whatever you have over here will just be completely randomized. So you can have just random effects of the text moving along like this. Okay, so that's just animating this one thing, the position. But you can add multiple different things on here. So you see at the moment, I'm just going to hide advanced, so it's a little bit less confusing. And under Animator 1 over here, you'll see that there's a little thing with an add and an arrow over here. So if I click on that, I can add a property. So I can say, let's add blur. So now if I blur these letters and change the offset, you see that it's applying the same effect to both of them, and then merging between the original and then the changed effect over there. But let's say you wanted to have these things happening at different times. So let's just go, and I'm going to select the blur, and I'm going to press delete, so the blur effect is gone now. You can also press backspace. And then I'm going to go to the layer, animate, and then I'm going to add a new animator now. So I wasn't selecting add, I was selecting the layer. Now I'm adding a blur, and you'll see now we've got animator 1 and animator 2. So now this blur can be affected using a completely different range selector over here. So if I go to this, and I can now say I only want the second half of the text to be affected by this. There you go. So you can combine these in interesting ways. So you can have one bit of animation for the text coming in and use completely different effects for animating the text flying out or something like that. Come in using one effect and then go out using another effect. So in this, I've just got position, and then I actually have another little animator over here for tracking. So that's just the spacing between the letters. And then I have a blur and opacity to fade them out. Because this is something you're going to want to use quite a lot when you're animating text. But of course, you don't always have to use these. You can just do plain animation and opacity and whatever. But this is a nice way to get individual letters or groups of letters to do things. So you don't have to do what I have done. You can use other things. So you've got a whole lot of different things you can animate. So the anchor point would be the position of the anchor point for the letters. You can do position of letters, the scale of letters. Skew would be the, you see there it sort of squashes individual letters across. Not usually something you want to change in text, but you might get an interesting effect for this. It almost looks sort of ghostly with this blur as well. Rotation for each letter, opacity, And you can even say all transform properties, which case we'll add every single one of these things and you can animate them. But that might get a little bit confusing to look at. You can also animate things like the fill color of the text. So you can change the text to go from white text to purple text or whatever. You can change the stroke width. So you can animate it so that they get a bigger width or the stroke disappears. You can change the tracking, so the spacing between all the letters, the line spacing. And an interesting thing is you can change the character value, so you can make your text sort of randomize. So if I turn, let's do this and add an animator for character value. And just turn on like randomize over here. I'm just going to delete all the other properties over here. It doesn't seem to like me doing it this time. Yeah, there you go. So if I adjust the offset over here, you see we can sort of get this randomization of all the different things between random characters and stuff. So you can produce some interesting effects using that as well. And once you start getting all these different things on a layer animated, it can be, you can get a whole lot of stuff sitting on here, which can be annoying to see and take up a lot of space. So one keyboard shortcut that's really useful is the U key. So if I press U, it'll just show all the properties that have keyframes. And if I press U twice, it'll show all the properties that have been changed on that layer, so that are not the default value. So that's just a quick way to see all the things that you have done, or just press U to see all the keyframed things on that specific layer without having to see all the other stuff. So I'm just going to create a new comp and just do that all over again, so you can, if you weren't following, you can just get some more idea of what to do. So under the text, I'm going to add a animator, and this time I'm just going to try something completely different. So let's do something with the full opacity and stroke. So let's just add a stroke on here. You see that as I adjust the stroke width, we get a little thicker thing over here. So let's go to 10 stroke and no fill. So if we use the range selector, we can go from the start. Let's just animate the start. So we're going from 0 to 100. So this is from the start to the end, getting unselected because we're going from all of it being affected to less as we go along. So that really looks pretty interesting. And we can add a second animator. So just go into the layer and just add another animator. So we can go and let's do scale. So we'll scale all the individual things. So we can go, let's just make them smaller. And then in this one, let's go do the reverse. So we're going to go backwards. So let's go from the end value over here and go backwards. So I'm just reversing, going from end selected to not selected. And if you want to add a second thing to these, so you can always add multiple things. So we've got the scale on this, but maybe we want to adjust the spacing because when they shrunk, they look really far apart. So let's add a tracking over here. So we can get the letter spacing a little bit better. It's still a little bit weird in bits. We've got some strange kerning, but whatever. You can do all the ordinary kerning stuff that you would do in Photoshop or Illustrator. So you can fix that if you want. So now just by animating the scale and the tracking, we get this cool thing where they sort of just shift out. So that is using just the basic stuff at the moment. And there are different types of range selectors. So this is range selector, but you can animate it using a selector over here. So where we added properties, so that's all the things that you're changing, you can add a selector. So if we add a wiggly over here, so it's just it's basically what it sounds like. If we add a wiggly over here, it sort of just wobbles between different things being selected. So you can get some playful effects if you go from, as you switch between things. So it sort of just randomizes around the selected area. And there are a lot of settings that you can change in this. We'll look at wiggly again in a few other things, but basically you get wiggles per second, so you can have it jiggle like jelly a lot, or if you lower it to something small, you get a smaller effect. You can just mess with these to get a slightly different effect. So you can also add multiple range selectors, so you can select the first half and then only effects or with a few letters in there or something. You can make really complicated things by mixing multiple different things over here. So I'm not going to go any more complicated than that, but you can see how you can just with a couple of things get interesting combinations of things over here. So I'm just going to quickly create a new composition and show you something that might be useful. So let's just so After Effects has a thing called animation presets. I'm only going to show you this now once you've already messed with that, because I don't want you to rely on these presets because not all of them are great, but they can be a nice way to learn how to do things. So I'm clicking on the text and presets, and you'll see that there is a thing called animation presets over here. So if I go down into that drop down, there is a thing, so there's a whole lot of them over here, but we're just going to look at text for now. So text presets over here, so you can get some different animation presets over here. So we're going to go, let's just look for some random ones. I don't know, let's go animate in. So if you want to figure out how to do a specific thing, these can be useful for learning like the different combinations of things to get a specific effect. So let's look at slow fade on, whatever. So you can just click and drag an animation preset onto a layer. And you'll see that it creates this preset for this animation at the current time. So wherever you have your time indicator, it will add that effect. So if I press the U key, remember I said that was the shortcut to show all the animated things, you can see that this just has one set of keyframes on here on a range selector. So it's a fairly simple preset over here. So you can imagine this is basically just opacity, I think. So if I open up the text, it's just an animator with, just opacity. So that's a very simple one. That was just using the animators, but then you can also animate text to move along a path. So it doesn't always look good. This is just a very quick one that I did, but you can get this sort of nice flowing thing along a path. So it's a very simple thing to add. All you need to do, I'm just going to create a new comp, add some text, and with your text layer selected, make sure that your layer is selected, you can just go into, using the pen tool, draw a path. So if you remember, this would actually add a mask to a layer. So if you do actually close this thing, you might want to turn off the mask. But in this case, I'm just going to not close the mask and just have points over here. So got a little squiggly line over here. So if you remember, that adds a mask to the layer over here. And then under the text properties, there was a thing called path options. So if I go to that, under path, where it says none, I can now select mask 1. So that was the mask that I just added over here. And if I select that, the text jumps onto the line over here. And it gives you a few settings. So reverse path, as you would expect, flips the start and the end. So when you're creating your path, just remember that it actually does make a difference where you start. So the first one that I created is the start. And then if I say reverse path, it will do it from the other direction. So just in case you did forget that, you can swap that. But you'll see that it now is going at the bottom of the line over here. So that might not be great. So you might want to just check those things when you create your path. The next setting is perpendicular to path. So you'll see what happens is these letters are all lined up with the angle of the path. If I turn off perpendicular to path, I'm just clicking on where it says on or off, and it switches. Then individual letters just face upwards, but their positions are adjusted still. And force alignment, the next setting over here, stretches the text to fit the entire length of the path. So if you turn that off, the text will just fit as long as the text is. But if you turn that on, it will stretch to fit the entire thing. First margin and last margin are what you would animate to change the position of the text along this path. So if I adjust the first margin over here, that is the start. So you can move the text along the path. And you'll see that if I go into negative values, it actually can go beyond the path. It just follows in the angle of the last point over there. So it's just going to go in a straight line at that angle forever now. So you don't have to make a path that goes off the screen if you don't want, but you can animate negative values. You can also, you'll see that you can then, with the select tool, you can just click and drag on the little, see there's a little text marker over here. So you see the cursor changes to a little selector thing, and you can change this start point just visually, so you don't actually have to change those values. So this is a nice way to just tweak these positions to look good. And then last thing is the last margin. It doesn't actually change anything at the moment, but that will affect the position when you have force alignment on. So you can use this to stretch out the text. So when you have force alignment on, it will fit the text between the start, or the first and the last margin. So you can use this to just stretch out your text. Now I'm going to move on to doing effects. So we did some quick look last time using Keylight for the green screen stuff. Now I'm just going to show you some more stuff using all sorts of other effects and specific layers for effects. Okay, so I am going to create a new comp, just so that there's nothing over here to confuse you. And I'm just going to drag in this dog image. Wait, I created the composition with non-square pixels accidentally, so you'll see that the image is stretched. If I go to square pixels, then the image just looks normal again. So that was, I think I selected a bad preset in one of the previous classes. Okay, so let's say you want to do color correction. So, you know, like curves or levels or something. So maybe you want a brighter image or something. So just like in Photoshop, you can do level adjustment, curve adjustments, all sorts of color correction and stuff. So I'm going to select the layer. I'm going to go to Effects, Color Correction, and you'll see that we've got, I don't know, what's that, 20, 30 different things over here. So let's just do a curves effect. So this basically adds an effect on here. So we've got curves under effect controls over here. We can turn that on or off using the FX icon over here. And you'll see that when you create an effect on a layer, you get a thing over here with FX under the switches on your layer. So you can turn on or off effects. So this will be all the effects on this layer. So you can make your adjustments on here. Let's, I don't know, just do it all brightening or something on here. Not going to do anything fancy, but so then if I turn that on or off, you can see the changes being affected over here. You can add multiple effects. So if I now want to go effect, color correction, let's do a so CC toner. So this thing will change the grayscale values to different colors. So we can go from, let's make the highlights yellow and the midtones orange and shadows red. So this is just an effect that basically like the gradient map in Photoshop. So then you can also do a blend, so you can switch back to the original value. So you can animate this effect turning on or off. And as you can see, all these different things have stopwatches on them, so you can animate the color to change that, midtones, highlights, all that. You can change that and animate all these different things in the effects. You can even animate the curves effect. So if I turn that on, go to a different time, you can animate the curves adjustment over here. So you can get really powerful combinations of things just by adding effects, animating them, changing them, layering them on top of each other. And if things start going crazy, you can just turn off the effects on one layer. So as I said, there's a switch over here. You can turn that off, and that just turns off all the effects on the layer. They're still there. You can turn them back on, so that just turns them on or off. If you don't like an effect, in the effects controls over here, you can select an effect and either backspace or press delete to remove that effect from the list. Yeah, so that's adding to individual layers. But let's say we've got a whole lot of different layers over here, and we want to have an effect that goes over all these different layers. So now I've got 3 different layers over here, and I want to have an effect that applies to all of them. So for this, you can create a layer called an adjustment layer. So if I go layer, new, adjustment layer, basically nothing changes. It doesn't actually show anything itself. But if you add effects to an adjustment layer, all the layers underneath it will be affected by the effects on that layer. So let's go effects. Let's do something. Let's do a blur. So I'm just going to do a fast blur because some of these blurs can be really slow, because blurs are always slow. Let's just do a fast box blur and blur radius, turn that up. So now all the layers underneath the adjustment layer are blurred. So if I now move this adjustment layer under the one layer, so the one dog layer over here is not blurred, but all the layers underneath it are blurred. And you can do the same things. You can add multiple effects on here. So let's do, I like the CC toner, so let's just turn that on. So now you see the colors are changing underneath here. Okay, but not all effects in After Effects change the layers underneath. You do get some effects that completely replace the layers. So if I go and say layer, new, well, actually, no, let's just do it with this dog so that it'll explain it a little bit better. So we've got this dog image over here, but if we go under effect, generate, this will replace anything in the layer. So let's do 4 color gradient. So you see this completely replaces the image here and creates this effect, which creates a gradient between 4 different colors over here. So this, you'll see you've got little points on here, and different effects have different controls in here. One of them is points like this, which you can click and drag, and you'll see that these different values over here are moving around. However, this effect is still constrained to the image boundary over here. I can always add another one. So let's go effect generate. One of them that I like is radio waves, and you see that replaces also the effect that was there before. So just be aware, a lot of the effects under generate will replace anything that's in a layer. So if you want to add these to an existing layer, add them to an adjustment layer or to a solid layer. So you can add a new solid and then apply these effects to it. So radio waves just creates this sort of effect of radio waves sort of coming out of a tower or something. And this has a point that you can animate. I'm not going to show you every single effect in After Effects because, as you can see, there are probably a few hundred. And you can experiment with all of these in your own time. But you can create some pretty powerful things using these. messing around with different things. So you can use like these things with so now I've toggled switches and I go to mode and I can say, let's put an overlay on this. So then we've got an overlay effect from this using whatever color from this effect. So you can mix and match and get some cool stuff. There are also different layers that can do distortion effects. So let's go and apply a new adjustment layer at the top, and let's do a distort effect. So there are tons of different distort effects. Let's just do a, I don't know, twirl, whatever. So we've got twirl with radius, and this is basically like the some of those effects that you get in Photoshop, and you can animate sort of this position of where the center is and get little effects like that. So like the, I don't know, filter effects that you get in Snapchat or something where you squish someone's face or stretch someone's face, you can do that sort of stuff with these. So have fun with those. But just remember that the more of these effects you add, the slower it will be to calculate all the frames in After Effects. We'll get into this in the next couple of lessons, but just be aware that it's not going to be as simple as just saving your file and there's your video. Sometimes you can have these effects adding up together to make every single frame take seconds or minutes to calculate. So you might get a 5-minute animation that will take 2 hours to export. So just be aware of that. Adding lots of effects, especially like blurs and distortions, can make your thing pretty slow to calculate. I'm not saying don't use them, just be aware. Particularly cool thing, which is the puppet tool. So what I'm going to do is I am going to import, so one of these penguin character things that I showed you, I think 2 or 3 lessons ago. So I'm just going to use penguin layered textured in this case. So this is the Photoshop one. You can use the other ones if you want. I'm going to do the retain layer sizes. So refer to the importing lesson if you missed that. And now we've got this. I'm going to drag it. Well, let's just open up, because I'm just going to copy all these layers so that it keeps their relative positions and paste them into this new composition. And I keep on making them with these non-square pixels. Let's just ignore that. So now we've got them all in their relative positions, but it's all really big. So I'm just going to recap you on parenting, because if I now scale this down, all the bits now will scale into different positions. So this is kind of off topic, but I'm just going to quickly show you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the body again. Well, select all the layers and parent them to the body. So we did this in the importing thing, but now all of them are parented to the body. And if I scale the body, they'll all scale relative to the body. So then I can move that and put him in the middle over here. Okay, that's just so that we get the character on a space that we can use over here, because the default comp that it comes in is rather small. Okay, so what I want to show you is a thing called the puppet tool. So it's a fun little tool that you can use to warp and distort a character or layers or whatever as you wish. So I'm going to use this on this penguin. I'm going to use it in a couple of different places. And it's a nice way to sort of animate nice, instead of just like rotating the wings, we can bend them or something like that. So I'm going to do it on the body at first, but let's do it on the wing. So the puppet tool is here next to the roto brush that we looked at last time. So this is the puppet position pin tool. So it's just a puppet tool, that's what I'll call it. You see it's Control P. So if we click on that, what it will do is it will add pins to a layer. So if I click on the wing, it will now add a pin. So that's that little yellow dot. And you see as I move the tool over there, it sort of changes to a selected thing. And if I click and drag, you'll see that the layer sort of moves around with that tool. But you don't usually just want to have one pin. You kind of want to use multiple because otherwise it will drag the entire layer with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a pin sort of where the shoulder of the wing sort of attaches, and then another one on the tip over here. And then if I click and drag on that, you'll see we get this effect of the wing sort of bending around that point. So this is a cool tool to use to animate bending shapes and controlling it. You'll see that there's a little bit of weirdness, like the tip of the shoulder is also bending, and we don't really want that. So there are a couple ways to use this tool to fix that. So the simplest is to just click and add sort of another pin there, and then when we drag it, it's sort of pinned in place. So imagine it's like pinning papers onto a pinboard or something, and then the more pins you have, the stronger it is fixed to that point. So if I just move the timeline indicator along and move this pin, you'll see it actually automatically creates keyframes as you go along. So you don't have to do anything to turn this effect on. It will automatically start doing this. And you'll see there's a little bit of weirdness. It's bending in a weird place there, so you just want to go and adjust your keyframes a little bit. But already it gives a pretty fun sort of fluid bending animation over here. There are things you can adjust to change how this looks. So what this actually does, it creates a sort of a mesh. So if we click on over here with the tool selected, there's mesh, and we can say show. And you can see exactly what it is doing. It's creating a sort of this lattice of points. And as you move these points around, they sort of deform this mesh around over here. You can change the detail of this. So say that you're getting funny little sharp edges over here. You can adjust the density of the mesh, and that'll just make smoother transitions as you bend this mesh around. But the more dense it is, the slower this calculation will be. So you kind of want this to be lower, but the lower it is, you might get these sort of jagged edges over here, which look a little bit weird. So I'm just going to do that on the body again so you can see. So let's go to the body, add some pins. So I'm going to add a pin for the left foot, a pin for the right foot, a pin for the head, a pin for the shoulder, and let's do a pin for the belly. And you'll see that sort of changes the mesh as we go. Let's just add a little bit more density over here. Let's go to, I don't know, 8. And since this body doesn't really lend itself to, it doesn't have legs or stuff, if you want to animate it walking, you would sort of want to maybe animate these legs in some way doing something. You'd have to animate the feet to move with that as well. But you can see how you can create some pretty cool effects by just using this puppet tool. I'm not trying to create anything amazing looking over here. I'm just showing you what you can do. But yeah, we've sort of got a little dancing penguin or something. There are now a few additional tools that I can show you how to refine this. So let's just zoom in over here where I have got this foot moving over here. And you see we've got a sort of a weird effect where it just looks strange. Like bits are like bending in funny ways and stuff like that. So that's one of the other tools under the puppet tool that you can use to control how that will look. So if I click and hold on the puppet tool over here, there are lots of additional tools over here. I'm not going to go into full detail on all of them, but the specific ones that I want to show you are the Starch tool and the Overlap tool. The other ones can be fun to mess around with, but the important ones to look at are the Starch and Overlap. So the Overlap one right at the bottom over here, what this does is show you which areas are in front of others. So if I move this animation over, you see we get this weird effect of like it's sort of blending in funny ways, and there's like a little bits of the one leg that sort of squishes through the other one. That's because it sort of doesn't know which bit is supposed to be in front of the other. So with the puppet pin overlap tool, we can create a sort of a overlay to show which bits are in front of others. So if I click on this foot over here, or this bottom of this body over here, it creates a blue pin over here, adjust this in front thing over here. Maybe if I just add 2. So if I add another tool over here and I set in front to a negative value, pin over here. So when I click on it, you see that in front is a positive number. If I click on this one, it's a negative number. And what this basically is saying is this point over here will always be in front of that point. If it's not doing exactly what you want, there is a tool, a little setting over here for extent. So if I make that higher, what it will do is it makes a larger area around this pin in front. Oh, there we go. So it wasn't actually adding to a point. So if I put it over one of these intersections over here, you see that it sort of shows a white value. So let's increase the extent. Now you see it's showing a larger area around this point is going a lighter color. So I can make that even wider. So there's this entire area over here, let's make it just a little bit smaller, is going to be an area that's in front. Then if I select this overlap, there we go, put it over a vertex over there, so that's one of those intersection points, and increase the extent, you see we get a dark area. So that's saying it's a behind area. So now when I play back this animation and turn off the show, let's just turn off the puppet tool. Now we'll see that it looks a lot better because this area is consistently in front. So we don't get that weird sort of overlapping bit. We've just got this foot going in front of the other one. So this way you can control a character. So you can say that, let's say you create like a stick man or something. You can make it that the arms always go over the body, or the left arm always goes over the right arm, or something like that. So like in this case, this leg will always go over the other leg. So you can use this to just change that sort of overlapping stuff. So let me just show you, like if I go back to this point over here, go back to the tool and swap them around. If I select this pin and make it a negative value, it doesn't have to be a negative value, it's just lower than the other one. And take this one and make it a higher number. Then when we do this, it'll be the other way around. So the back leg is now going to be in front of this one, and it looks very weird because that's not what we wanted it to look like. But you can control what happens with these things. Hopefully that makes sense. I'll show you on the wing. So if we select the wing over here, so let's just go to the puppet tool and do a thing where we just bring this tip over here. It's kind of hard to see because it's all black, but if we go with the overlap tool and we just go to the start, we can say we want the tip to be on top and the base to be behind. So this way we can be sure that whenever we animate the tip, it will show in front of the shoulder or something like that. So you don't have it that the tip of the arm suddenly disappears behind itself, which might look weird in this case, or it might be the effect that you're trying to get. Okay, so despite having put pins in places, we've still got weird looking things going on here. So like as we're moving the arm around, like the whole shoulder is sort of jiggling around. So let's look over here. It sort of jiggles around, and when we move the feet only over here, the head is also sort of jiggling around. So you can always add more pins, or what you can do, use the Starch tool. So if I click and hold and go Starch pin tool, and I'm just going to click on the top of the shoulder over here, and I'm going to let's just undo that. So I don't think it actually has that setting. But basically the Starch tool allows you to create bits that are sort of solid. So that will sort of solidify the way things bend. If I put a Starch pin in the middle between these 2 points of the wing, what we'll get is a much more solid bend between those things. So this sort of comes from like starching clothes, so like it makes it stiffer. So if I add a bunch of them in here, you'll get this sort of more solid bend between them instead of the soft bend that it was getting then before. So it sort of changes the points that it adds in there, and it like changes the way that it will bend. So we can add this to the body, so we can make it so that when the feet are moving, you see now the head will not move as much. So we can add another one to the tip over here, and that will help sort of stabilize the bits. And we can actually also do this on the feet as well. So we can say that we want more of this area around here, each leg to move with it. So that changes the way this will now look. You see now that each leg is now a larger area that is moving with that pin. It's a little bit hard to explain, but you can see how that now looks a little bit different. We've got like now more area moving with each foot. The puppet tool is really fun for working with characters. I find you can get really nice sort of organic bending and stuff like that. So you can imagine if I now started animating the feet moving with these pins as they move around. So you can get some sort of cool dancing effects like Mary Poppins dancing penguins or whatever. The puppet tool does count as an effect. So if I go to the effect controls, you see that there is the puppet tool over here. It is an effect. So we can just turn that off on a layer if you want without losing all the settings. Yeah, I think that will be it for today. The rest of the week, so we're going to go into 3D stuff and then rendering and exporting your videos. Yeah, so thanks for joining in and thanks for the comments.